Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Marketing Live for Thursday, February 22nd, 2018. I'm Rob Zinkin. I serve as Associate Vice President for Marketing at Indiana University. And today we tackle redesign done right. Will 2018 perhaps bring a redesign for you? Or maybe it's time for a redesign and someone needs to lead the charge, and that person is you. Today, we will cover everything you need to know to set your redesign up for success. First, though, a reminder that Marketing Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network. Our episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. You can be part of our live broadcast today with your comments and your questions. Please join us using the Higher Ed Live hashtag on Twitter and just jump into the conversation, and we'll get those questions and comments passed along. All of our episodes are free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or take Higher Ed Live with you on the go by subscribing to the podcast. And be sure to check out tomorrow's episode of Higher Ed Live Special Edition on organizing your Marcom team for success. That will be a great one. Higher Ed Live, of course, is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. Have you ever wondered what prospective teens are thinking when they receive and read, or perhaps ignore, your institution's recruitment marketing? The third study in the Myth-Busting series, in partnership with NRCC UA, is the first to focus on the complete enrollment marketing mix. The research will uncover the best marketing channels and communication preferences that have the biggest influence on prospective teens' perception of your institution. Don't miss your chance to sign up and receive early access to the research results and white paper that will be released this month. And I repeat, don't miss out. This research is such good stuff. Well, it's my pleasure to welcome Voltaire Santos Moran, co-founder and co-owner of M. Stoner. Voltaire works with clients to forge and sustain transformative, memorable, and effective partnerships, and his expertise spans far beyond today's topic of website redesigns. His background spans everything from alumni relations and development to storytelling and content strategy. And one of my favorite parts of Voltaire's bio is his ability to move institutions from a project mindset to a process mindset, and we'll certainly get to that important point during today's episode. Hi, Voltaire. So excited to have this conversation today.
Hi, Rob. Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
So I gave listeners a bit of background information about you, but I'd like to go a little deeper than that and ask if you could share, Voltaire, something about your professional journey that has had a lasting impact or helped to shape your career, or perhaps even shape your professional outlook or philosophy on the work that you do.
Sure, absolutely. I've thought about this question for a bit, and I think what I would like to share is how I actually get started in the work that I do. So those of you who have seen my bio know that I started in development. It was very strange being a major gifts officer at 21, not something that I would recommend to anyone. But the way that I got started in it was actually that I had a mentor in college. She was the director or the dean of continuing education at Northwestern. She ran into me on the street about a year after I graduated and said, "I've been looking for you and I don't have your contact information. Would you like a job?" And she was the one who got me started in development and said, you know, you could go corporate, you could do any number of things, but I think knowing who you are, that you're going to thrive in an education community. And I've never looked back. Even once I finished up my MBA and decided that I wanted to go into consulting, I wanted to stay within the industry that I grew up in. And so I looked specifically for consulting assignments that would allow me to continue to work with colleges and universities.
That's terrific. And as someone who's also had some development experience along the way as part of my career, I think that's something that serves you well, no matter which track you take, marketing or otherwise, because much like we want everyone we work with to be marketers, we're all marketers, whether you have a direct marketing role or not. The same goes with fundraising. I mean, we're all fundraisers. We're all making that case for your institution, whether you're directly soliciting gifts or not.
Absolutely agreed. Development is a perfect background for honestly any career in education, I find.
Well, so much great stuff to get to today. And first, to start the discussion, would like to focus on justifying the website redesign. And listeners may be trying to make that case to colleagues, and those colleagues may not fully understand all that it takes in terms of time or cost or process. But we all know how important the website is. So to start off, what advice or what resources would you point to? What advice would you share with higher ed colleagues who are trying to make that case? How would you help them make that case in order to justify the redesign?
Sure. I would say that everyone loves research these days, right? Everyone wants to make data-driven decisions, and I think that's really smart. So the first place I would point people is to the research that we've done with myth busting, because it really does give a sense of what perspectives are looking for. And I can cite just a few statistics that I think would be helpful. The first is that we learned in the research that we've done that the website is the single most influential source of information that an institution manages that prospective students look at. Now, I'll draw a distinction there because there's the campus tour, which students will say is the single most influential factor, period. But in terms of communications that an institution creates, the website is the single most influential, and that's through all 4 phases of the process. One of the things we learned in our research is that the admissions process follows the pattern of what's called a complex sale. And a complex sale usually goes through 4 phases, from research to apply to accept and then to commit. And across the board, through all of those phases, the website scored far higher than any other communications vehicle for an institution to manage. The second thing I would say is that we've learned that academic programs, visiting costs and aid, and student life are the big 4 sections of the site that prospective students look at. And they say that intuitive navigation and the ability to easily find information are the most important things they look for in terms of site functionality. Last thing is that we found that pictures of campus are as important or even a little bit more important, depending on the phase, than academic program rankings. So when you take a look at the research of what students are looking for and what's important to them, you have a benchmark that you can use to then take a look at your site and ask, well, how well do we feature our academic programs? How intuitive and how easy to find is this information? How up to date and how strong is our photography and our videography? So once you know what the students are asking for or expecting on your site, you can then use that as a way to say, here's where we fall short, and do a gap analysis and say, this is what we really need to shore up in order for our communications to be much better.
Excellent. I want to make sure we captured those big 4, the areas that students are looking for information. So academic programs, visit information, costs, and student life.
Exactly. Those are the sections of the site that students say they visit the most, particularly in the exploration phase.
So when undertaking a redesign, and I think obviously some of those reasons might be, well, it's just time. It's been a while since we last launched a redesign, or just the feeling of, wow, it looks dated. But we know that a website is all about performance. So what, from your perspective, are main reasons for an institution to start or undertake a redesign process?
Sure. So let me offer 6 reasons that I think that would be helpful. First reason I would say is, let's say your page performance times are poor. You know, one of the things that we know nowadays is that page performance time needs to be, pages basically need to load in 3 seconds or fewer. So if what you're finding is your page performance is poor, it's taking a long time to load, then that's an indication that there's some optimization to be done in images, that there's some optimization to be done in code. So one reason that you might approach a web redesign is to make sure that your pages are performing really well. The second is that you might find that your pages are not compliant. They're not accessible. Now, one of the things that I had read recently is that basically lawsuits against universities have doubled in the last year, and based on non-compliant websites. So if you know that your pages are not accessible, or you suspect your pages are not accessible, that's a key reason to engage in either an accessibility audit or in a redesign itself. I think if your application or yield numbers need a boost, That's a key reason to take a look at a website redesign. You might find that it's an issue of usability. It might be an issue of process. It might be an issue of content on your site. Usually, it's a combination of all of those things and maybe a poor visual interface. So if what you want to do is boost application and yield numbers, a redesign can help really well. I can point to two statistics there. St. Louis University, after launching their new site, enrolled an historic freshman class in 2016. And a large part of that was because of all of the work that they had done in optimizing their new website. Rush University, in tandem, well, not in tandem, but Rush University as well, saw a bounce of 200 or 2,000 new admissions inquiries the first month after launching their website. And that was because they had optimized their academic pages so well for conversion. I would say a few other reasons for taking a look at a website redesign are, if you notice in terms of traffic that your academic page program traffic is low, we know that students are looking at academic programs. It basically is the main thing they want to find. So if you're finding that the traffic is low, chances are that that information is buried or that information is poor, and this is a chance for you to make significant advances in the way that you're presenting that information. And the two other things I would cite as reasons for website redesign are, number one, has it been 5 years since you relaunched the site? If it has, chances are the interface is looking a little worn. Chances are the images might be updated, might be outdated. The mobile design is probably a retrofit and is probably just one long list of menu items without much thought given to visual hierarchy or proper touch targets. And you might be 2 or 3. In fact, I was talking to someone earlier today that was who was 4 versions behind in the content management system version that they were running. The last reason I would cite is, if it's been 3 or more years since you've done a content audit, then chances are that your site has experienced what I call organic sprawl. And organic sprawl is what happens when you have a decentralized publishing environment with absolutely no governance in place. So in the 3 years it has been since you've taken a look at all of your pages and made sure that each page has an owner and each page has an assigned editorial review cycle, chances are your pages have ballooned, that there is outdated and duplicative information out there. And this is a really, really great opportunity to get your governance in place and bring your site back down to what I call a lean, clean, and manageable set of pages that are really focused on prospective students.
And Voltaire, I can just imagine all of the nodding heads right now when they hear the term organic sprawl at their institutions. So lots of considerations there. And how should folks go about in terms of trying to answer some of those questions? It seems like there's almost a state of readiness that's needed in preparing for a redesign. So what are some of the things that that marketers can do as they prepare for the redesign, but before they actually get knee deep into it?
Yeah, that is a really great question. And I would say that there are 4 things that you can consider doing as incremental steps or preparatory steps. These also could be things that you decide to do as a way to help build your case for a redesign. So the first is usability studies. And I'm a big proponent of one-on-one testing conducted remotely. There are some really great tools out there that you can use now. And usability testing provides firsthand feedback from your target audiences. It's a small footprint. Usually you can deploy a usability study for, say, a prospective undergraduate audience and do 8 to 10 interviews and get a lot of really great information. So it doesn't have to be long and drawn out. And what it does is it also gives actionable information to you. So one thing that you can do either internally or with a partner is do some usability testing on your sites. And you might decide to do a small test for undergrads and a small test for graduates. You can determine how many usability studies will be helpful, but that's a really great first step. I think if you want to get external feedback, doing something like a site checkup would make a lot of sense. So bringing in an external partner to take a look at multiple facets of your site and give you a review of, let's say, opportunities in information architecture, opportunities in SEO, in content, in visual design, in analytics. So having someone with fresh eyes take a look at the site, and give you actionable feedback, allows you to plan a roadmap for a larger project. And that also, I think, Rob, can be a small footprint. Usually a site checkup can be completed in as few as 2 to 3 weeks. I would also suggest two other things. Maybe performing an accessibility audit. So if you're not sure how accessible your site is, having a third party do an audit will help you to identify specific issues in accessibility. It also provides a foundation for training. So I can give you a really funny example. I remember doing a Writing for the Web workshop once where I was explaining the basics of accessibility and what an alt tag was. And someone who managed a lot of pages at the college said to me, "Oh, that's what an alt tag was for. I have no idea. I just kept putting pictures of people in that field." So once you know where the bigger accessibility issues are, or the accessibility issues that come up consistently, that allows you to zero in your training program and really focus on those issues. And again, this also gives you input for the larger redesign effort. So you can create priorities for that redesign based on the audit. The final thing I would say is now is a really great time to get your analytics in order. So establishing baselines, designing a dashboard or dashboards of meaningful metrics, and letting this be the beginning of data-driven decision-making. So even before your new site gets live, start collecting information on what your current site is doing, how it's performing, so we can use that as a comparison for success in the future.
Such great advice. So thank you for that. And as we think about all the reasons to have the redesign, I want to jump to what then we want this redesign to achieve. And if you could walk through then, Voltaire, some of the key goals, considerations that we should have when undertaking a redesign, those key goals, and then how do we go about measuring or identifying metrics for those various goals, knowing that there are more than a single goal when we're talking about a website undertaking with multiple audiences and trying to, while we know we can't be all things to all people, still knowing in higher ed we have multiple constituencies to serve.
Absolutely. And well, Rob, you and I know from doing this that a redesign solves everything, right? It's the cure for every single problem a university has. Yeah, honestly. But to a certain extent, I think that a project like this has the ability to create a lot of positive change on campus. And so I advise my clients to look at this as holistically as possible. So when you're setting goals, I encourage my clients to look at 6 key areas for setting goals. Now, some of these are fairly usual, right? So when we talk about goals for a website, obviously we want goals centered around engagement. We want to find out how sticky pages are, how much people are using site tools and functionalities like program finders. We want to find out how well they're interacting with all the interactive features that we've built. We also have key goals around conversion. So there are key things that we want people to be able to do or tasks that we want them to complete on the site. Fairly typical ones include requesting more information, contacting a counselor, visiting campus, and applying now. You can pretty much look at any university site and see those. Now, in talking with a number of my clients, what I'm finding is that there are other key conversion goals that are sometimes very important to that institution. So one client I talked to yesterday was telling me about how important athletics is to the recruitment process and how many people go to this D3 school, not because they think that they're going to be able to create an all-star professional career out of their attendance, but because they want to continue to play sports while they're getting their college degree. And for them, meeting a coach is one of the key things they want a prospective student athlete to be able to do. For others, it's talking with faculty members or signing up for a specific event. For community colleges, it's registering for class because one of the things they want people to do as soon as they apply is to just basically sign up. So there are key goals around conversions that I think people can set in looking at or determining success for a redesign. There are goals around insight, and those are more the vanity metrics: page views, unique visitors, traffic sources, devices, locations. But then there are three other areas of goals that I think that a website redesign have the capacity to address. The first is in efficiency. So a lot of times people, when they're calling different offices across campus, are calling because they can't find the information on the website. And they're already cranky because they didn't want to have to pick up the phone to begin with, and they can't find the information, so they're frustrated. One of the great ways that you can measure success on a web redesign is to see how the high-touch, low-value interactions decline. So does the phone stop ringing? Do you get fewer emails to the webmaster with complaints? So reducing the high-touch, low-value interactions, and also reducing the high-touch, or increasing the high-touch, high-value interactions. A lot of offices I talk to say that they don't have the time to get to the more important conversations and their more important touch points with students because they're dealing with these consistent low-value interactions. So if you're able to free up that space by designing a website that is highly usable with really robust information, then that allows you to focus on your job more. And the third area around efficiency is improvements in internal process. So a lot of times, the problems that we identify in a website project have nothing to do with the website itself. I'll give you one example. When we were working with a graduate institution in the last few years, we found that between the acceptance and the committing phase, there was this gap of sometimes 6 weeks between the time that you got your admissions letter and the time you got your financial aid package. Now, anyone who's worked with graduate students know that this is a really highly stressful time in a graduate student's life, and that financial considerations are, if not the main driver, the second most important driver. So what the school was finding was that they were losing their best candidates to schools that had their act together and were able to issue financial aid packages faster than they were able to do that. So one of the efficiency goals then became, how do we change the process? How do we reduce that gap between admissions and financial aid in a way that is going to support the student journey better? Does that make sense?
It does, yes. So many relatable examples, and you've got my wheels spinning thinking of the evaluating a site based on reducing low touch, low value touch points and increasing those high touch, high value ones. So a great lens in which to think about or look at a website redesign project. So thanks yeah, go ahead.
I was going to offer two more if that's okay. The fifth thing that I would say in terms of key goals is increased collaboration. So one of the things we hear a lot with institutions is that everyone works in a silo, and that no one cooperates in terms of producing content, and a lot of people duplicate content. So one goal, I think that, or one set of goals around a redesign should be around greater collaboration. How many people are working together, how much content sharing is going on, how many or how few authoritative sources of information or ASIs can you establish? This idea that you create it in one place, sometimes publish it in many, and one person or one office is accountable for that. So you can set goals around collaboration that can be measured by some analytics around page counts. And I think the last thing that I would say is reach and reputation are also some things that can be affected by a redesign. So brand awareness and brand perception. And this may not be readily measurable by, say, Google Analytics, but in terms of social listening, in terms of longitudinal, qualitative, and quantitative studies, you can definitely benchmark any sort of positive move of the needle in terms of reach and reputation as a result of the website as well.
Great. And just a quick reminder for anyone who has a comment or a question, just use that Higher Ed Live hashtag on Twitter. And thinking of my experiences, I'm sure others can look back on various experiences over the course of their career with website redesigns and can identify some of those pain points along the way, or perhaps even things that derailed the process. And you've compiled a list of 10 common mistakes that is so on target and touches on all of these important things that it would be great if you could walk us through those and identify and share the common mistakes that you have seen along the way working with a number of clients and a number of institutions where the website redesign gets off track or hits a speed bump along the way. Where are those common pain points?
Absolutely. And Rob, I've been working on websites for almost 20 years now, and what is really remarkable to me is we've evolved so much in our ability to do digital communications, and yet there are so many of the same pain points and the same issues that come up again and again and again. In fact, in a recent webinar, we did a poll of what the most significant issues were that people were facing in a web redesign, and the top two were all the crappy pages, so that idea of content sprawl, and then deciding who gets to decide, the idea of governance and ownership. And I thought that would be a good backdrop to going through this top 10 list, because some of these have been issues, I think, from the dawn of digital communications. So let's start with number 10. Number 10, treating the project primarily as a technology effort. So while technology is a key component of the redesign, it is basically a component of a redesign and shouldn't drive decisions or limit ideas. At this point, I tell people in 2018, technology can do almost anything you want it to do. It's a matter of strategy, it's a matter of content, and it's a matter of sustainable solution. Number 9, I would say, is viewing the project primarily as a design endeavor. So a good redesign will focus on the design. It'll also incorporate usability, content, technology, and governance. So a wise approach is really a holistic approach. And if what you're doing is looking for something that is just an immediate visual appeal, and that is the driving priority of website, then you're shortchanging the project. I would say taking an overly aggressive approach to a timeline is a huge mistake as well. There's a really great quote that I read once that said, no Gantt chart has ever survived an encounter with reality. And so we see a lot of RFPs where people say, this site needs to be live in 3 months. And the number of times that actually has happened, probably maybe once or twice. And the people who have said it has to be really aggressive, has to move, are usually the people who have to go back and say, we've extended the timeline to 6 months or 9 months. So being realistic about the timeline and understanding what's really driving the timeline. Is there a hard business driver, or is it a political driver, or is it an arbitrary issue set by or an arbitrary date set by someone who happens to be an authority that needs to be examined and gently challenged? That's definitely a lot of what we see with different projects. I would say that having unrealistic budget expectations is also a common mistake. So contrary to expectations, web design has not gotten cheaper over the years. And I think that part of it is because the needs have become more complex and the designs have become more sophisticated. But part of it's also that the time to do a really good web redesign hasn't changed. The expertise hasn't diminished. You still need those resources to do something really well. I would say another common mistake is not having the proper leadership in place. So the best redesign efforts I find are the ones that have a president who's highly supportive, not highly engaged, but highly supportive of the effort, and someone who is the champion for the initiative that has authority and visibility and credibility and a high degree of trust, so that that person basically it provides you cover to do all the things that you need to do. Number 5, in terms of common mistakes, neglecting analytics again. So I have seen a lot of times what has happened, redesign after redesign after redesign, is that the smaller resourced teams who didn't have the chance to look at analytics before they redesigned the site are also the teams who didn't have the time to put the tracking code in when the new site launched, and are still so strapped that they're not looking at the analytics. So getting a hold, or getting your arms around analytics at the very beginning and making sure that that is one of the foundational components of your approach moving forward is really significant. I would say that 4th reason, avoiding governance pain points. So deciding who gets to decide, those are really uncomfortable conversations, but they're conversations I think that institutions need to have in order for institutions to have sustainable sites. Just a few more reasons. Number 3, having fuzzy personalization thoughts. We've been talking about personalization in education for over a decade now, right? We all point to, right? Yeah. And we all point to Amazon as our model of, oh, that's exactly what we need to do. And then we all dial back, rock back on our heels, and we say, but all of the effort required to produce all of that content. And then we put personalization back on the shelf, and we trot it out in the next redesign as something we want to cover. So I think that understanding what personalization can do, but also how personalization can become meaningful to a prospective student is important. And I think that means that when you take a look at personalization efforts, it should be mapped back to the journey. So if you take a look at that 4-phase journey from exploring to applying to accepting to committing, asking, all right, what personalization helps in this phase, or what personalization helps in this phase? Because I think that a lot of times what we dream up in our heads is, oh, wouldn't it be great to personalize this, is kind of cool and interesting, but it's something that's not important in the experience. So making sure that if you are going to undertake personalization efforts, they really support the journey and they mean something to the prospective student you're trying to serve, I think is important. Number 2, in terms of common mistakes, expecting photography to come cheap and easy. I think a lot of us expect that our digital asset management system is the key to all of our photography concerns for a new website redesign. And the sad reality is most of those pictures are not good enough for the web redesign. So realizing upfront that you need to budget for photography and videography, and it should be very specific to this effort, is something that people need to do more deliberately. And then I would say the number 1 mistake that we see in 2018 is, again, around content. And this idea that you can push content strategy down the line. That first, let's take care of the technology and the design, and then we'll do the writing. Now more than ever, content strategy is essential. And taking up content strategy at the very beginning of the project is the best way to ensure that the design and the technology and the analytics that you put in place are really anchored to a focus on your user.
Again, so many helpful bits of advice throughout all of that. And I'll add one note, and I know we could do a deep dive on several of those points, but I really appreciated, Voltaire, your comments about leadership, because whether it's a website redesign or even an overall brand strategy process, we always hear about the importance of leadership to the extent that it's almost become a cliche and we don't even know what that means or what it entails. So the comments about leadership meaning authority, visibility, credibility, and trust, I think puts a really helpful framing in terms of what leadership means and why it's so important to this process.
Awesome.
So you did mention as one of those the unrealistic timelines, and you referenced how that could be laid out in an RFP, 3-month turnaround or something like that. And I know part of this is being able to craft the right RFP or a helpful RFP. So what recommendations do you have that might be useful for marketers to know as they try to put together a useful RFP?
Sure. So I will go on record as saying that most agencies hate RFPs, and that more and more agencies are just responding to fewer and fewer of them. And we take a good, long, hard look, and I know that our friendly competitors and our peers do the same thing whenever we get an RFP. And there are 4 things that we see as red flags. So the first thing is anything that hints at litigious language that communicates you're our vendor and not our partner. So if the RFP is written in a very one-sided way of you will deliver this and you will deliver this, and these are the penalties for not doing this, then that's a red flag that most really good agencies might say it might not be worth responding to. The second problem we see with RFPs a lot is scope that doesn't match up. So there will be an executive summary that has X, Y, and Z as the scope of the project, and then the details themselves don't match up. So fuzzy scope or suspect scope is a second red flag for us. A third red flag is zero visibility. So one of the things that I think you need to be able to do in a process like this is get a sense as someone who's hiring an agency of what the people are going to be like to work with. And one of the things that we as an agency want to do is get a sense of the team that we would be working with and assessing fit. And there have been RFPs we've received where there is absolutely no ability to contact a team member, to have a pre-bid conference, to know who the project team is or the decision-making team. And that's a problem because you get into sometimes a working relationship with a team that doesn't quite mesh, right? And then I think the third is implausible requirements. So some RFPs have stipulations that are either draconian or unnecessarily restrictive that would make people say, it might not be worth responding to. So those are the red flags. What do we look for, or what makes a great RFP? I think brevity, number one. So Gettysburg College put together an awesome RFP for their website. It was, I think, 4 pages long, which is incredible. So a short RFP that includes a summary of the landscape, a clear scope of work, required information, budget ranges, if you're able to share that, specific evaluation points. So how are you going to be judging the RFPs, and what weight are you going to assign, for instance, to experience with an education or experience with a particular content management system? That's something that's really helpful for a potential agency partner to know. We'd love to know the institutional stakeholders who will be involved in the process, and also web properties and third-party systems that are not or are included in the process. So if we were going to boil down a great RFP or a great RFP process, I would say, number one, preliminary groundwork. So Gettysburg, hearkening back to what they did about 2 months of campus and community engagement before they issued the RFP. So they did their own listening tour with stakeholders to make sure that they had a sense of what was necessary. They spent a lot of intense time together as a project committee, aligning on expectations and coming to a common understanding of their vision as a committee for the project. They put together a very clear and concise RFP, and they also did research in terms of who they were sending their RFP to. Another sort of yellow flag for me is when I find that people have sent RFPs out to more than a dozen different agencies. That tells me that an institution might not have done the research of the different agencies that they're sending to, and might not be clear on what it is that they need in a partner. So one of the things that a good RFP or a good RFP process does is it figures out what you can do internally. And then as a result of what you can do internally, what is it that you really need an industry or an agency partner to be able to bring to the table? So if you're already strong in user experience and user design, that's going to be less of a criteria. If you are not so strong in content strategy, or you don't have staff doing analytics, or you don't have a front-end developer, that changes the mix as well. So knowing what it is that you need in a partner should help limit the number of partners that you solicit, and should also make the process internally a lot less painful, since it reduces the friction in terms of the amount of RFPs that you need, or the number of RFPs that you need to review.
Excellent, excellent. And you mentioned, Voltaire, the involving internal stakeholders, institutional stakeholders, and engaging the campus as you walked us through that. And certainly there are expectations that need to be managed among even internal stakeholders. So how should marketing leaders or those who might be leading this process go about that? And how do you best engage colleagues internally, faculty, staff, and others, and engage them in a meaningful way that moves the project process forward?
Sure. So quick story on this, or to frame my comments on this. I was at a discovery meeting with faculty members, all the deans of the departments, a couple of weeks back for a new client. And the dean of one of the schools looked at me and said, well, I'm really interested. Am I going to be able to weigh in, and how are you going to take my feedback? And I said to him, you will be consulted and you will be heard. And I think that at the end of the day, that's what most stakeholders want, right? Obviously, it's impossible to take every single piece of feedback and incorporate every single priority into what you're doing. That's how most websites come to a really bad, ugly end, is trying to meet all those expectations. But inviting people to the table and respectfully listening to what they have to say and involving them at key points in the process where they can have a meaningful input is, I think, the key to creating a really great process that builds consensus and buy-in. So where do people get involved? You can get people involved in the discovery sessions. So having stakeholders come to the discovery sessions and interacting with the agency and providing feedback. You can involve them at certain points within the process itself through card sorting studies or usability sessions, particularly if you are building communications for internal audiences. It's great to have them help you to shape the site structure, the navigation, and the content. You can involve them through town hall meetings. I know with some of our clients, we came to campus several times during the process to provide an update on where we are, to show the deliverables, and then to invite questions and feedback in that large group format. And 99.9% of the time, that works out really well. Pro tip, feed them first.
Absolutely. Yes. You can never forget that. So important.
Exactly. Well, a couple of other places you can involve them. I would say that creating a regular communications plan, 5-6 years ago, it was in the form of blogs that people could read up on. But I think maybe more in this day and age, social and email are probably smarter ways to push communications out there, as long as it's not done in a haphazard way. And then the last thing I would cite is the sort of educational process that needs to happen with internal audiences before site launches. So normally with the site launch, you're changing the navigation, you're changing the content, you're moving around resources that people are used to finding in a certain place in order to serve themselves or in order to serve their constituencies. There is nothing worse for someone to log in or to open up their browser and pull up a website that looks so drastically different from what they were used to, and they're not able to find the information that they need at the ready. So I like to build communications plans around education for the month or so before a launch, where internal audiences get to see the site in action. And we get to say, all right, these are the top 10 things that faculty and staff look for. These are the top 10 things that students look for. Or this is what we know prospects are looking for, and here's where you find that. So educating people on where key resources are and helping to reduce that sort of transition helps the change to go over well, because no matter how positive the change is still hard. And we need to help our internal audiences to manage that change well.
And I want to be sure to get to the point that I mentioned from the outset about your philosophy of it's not a project, it's a process, and moving that mindset, shifting that mindset. Because as great as it is when the new website launches and everybody loves it, hopefully, it's just getting started, right? It's never, a website is never done. So how do you go about, or what does continuous improvement or ongoing work on a website, what does that look like?
Yeah, it looks a lot different from what most people are doing. and it's the idea is, and I still see this really fairly prevalently in our industry, that people feel like the website is a capital expenditure. So I get a lot, and this, honestly, I think this comes a lot from senior leadership with the view of, all right, how long is it before I have to write another 6-digit check? So a lot of times a senior VP or a provost or even the president will ask, well, how long is the shelf life of a website these days? Is it 5 years? Is it 7 years? And what I tell them is, there was a time that we treated this as a capital project where we had this mammoth effort. We launched the site. Everyone walked away, went back to their regular jobs, and was just grateful that this entire effort was done for the time. And things sort of languished. In the meantime, 5 years later, we're back at the same table asking, all right, How do we fix the organic sprawl? How do we change this? What did analytics tell us? Oh, we didn't actually look at analytics. So the sort of the way forward that I'm hoping more institutions take is this idea that the website is not a project, but it's a process. So you launch the site, but then you hopefully have educated leadership with the idea that the investment continues, that resources and expertise are necessary after the site is launched, and that you make ongoing improvements to the site. So it's not refreshing the site or relaunching the site every 5 years or giving it a facelift every year. It's a matter of establishing a regular rhythm of changes and enhancements based on experiments. So testing out, Rush University does a really great job of this, where they test out placement and color and size of photographs and where and how long a video is, and they optimize based on what they find in experimenting over the course of a month or two. So using the site as a sort of living, or treating the site as a living, breathing sort of entity, making constant improvements to that and fueling those improvements based on analytics. So taking a look on a regular basis about what's happening and figuring out the why behind the what. Because a lot of times analytics don't tell us why something is not working or why something is not getting a lot of traffic. It simply tells us that it is. So we need to go beyond what the numbers are and figure out what the numbers are telling us, or at least hypothesize, and then experiment, and then basing long-term the decisions that you make on the users and what's going to best engage them, rather than on the political and someone saying this needs to be on the homepage, which I think that all of us as professionals continue to face in this, even in this day and age, where something that's completely irrelevant to a prospective student might show up on a homepage because a senior VP said it needed to be there for a certain amount of time. So creating this idea that, or this practice of continuous improvement could, at a certain point mean that if you do it right, your last big web redesign is your last big web redesign. And from then on, everything is changed and everything is improved upon in such a regular rhythm and fashion that your site is continually becoming better and better and better.
That is outstanding, absolutely. And I think you could definitely do a mic drop after all of that because it's so on target. But I do want to ask before we wrap up, we have covered so much ground, but is there anything else that we missed, or any final pieces of advice, overall recommendations that you would like to give to those who are doing this work before we wrap up?
That is a really, really great question. I actually am at a loss for that, Rob. We covered a lot of really great information. Well, I will say one thing. Over the years, what I have seen is that education is finally starting to get it, right? There was a time that it was very hard to build a case to hire the level of expertise and the amount of expertise that we need to do digital communications well. And a refreshing trend that I've seen in the last couple of years is that education institutions are finally saying, you know what, we really do need a large team to manage this. We really need to provide the resources for the team to do this well. And so I'm excited and heartened by the level of sophistication and expertise that institutions are building internally. And I think that is just a great thing from the standpoint of being able to take a website, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the most important communications tool that an institution has, and making it work for the institution.
Great. I appreciate the words of encouragement and reason for optimism as a way to close up for today. And Voltaire, thank you so much. Just fantastic advice across the board today. Appreciate you sharing your time, your expertise in making what is a complex process something that is digestible and really giving us actionable information. So thanks again.
Good deal. Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
And as always, thank you to M. Stoner, which produces and makes Marketing Live possible. Again, be sure to get reminders about this and other episodes by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. You can browse the archives at higheredlive.com or subscribe to the podcast. I'm Rob Zinkin. Thanks again for tuning in to Marketing Live on the Higher Ed Live Network.